Really, that looks at accessibility, there's sustainability, innovative solutions, and of course investing in social good and smart utilisation of technology. This is something that Jim Fruchterman is really, really good at. He embraces this in his work with Benetech. He's the founder and the CEO of Benetech, which is a Silicon Valley. So we have someone here from Silicon Valley, so I'm very impressed with that. Non-profit technology company. And he develops software applications to address unmet needs of users in the social sector. He's the recipient of numerous awards. I'm not going to list them because there's a million of them, recognising his work as a pioneering social entrepreneur. Since its founding in 1989, so really when you think about technology and the fast pace, in the last 10 years or so, he's really, really at the cutting edge and at the beginning, because it's even beyond that. Benetech has touched the lives of hundreds of thousands of people. Its tools and services have transformed the ways in which people with disabilities access printed information. It's actually quite diverse, the things he does, because not only that, they've facilitated at-risk human rights defenders being able to safely document abuse, and I hope you can tell us more about that because I had a little look into that and it's fascinating, and aid environmental practitioners to succeed in their efforts to protect species and ecosystems. So quite a diversity there. Through his work with Benetech and as a trailblazer in the field of social entrepreneurship, Jim continues to advance his vision of a world in which the benefits of technology reach all of humanity, not just the wealthiest and the most able 5%. And I think that 5% figure is quite interesting. So, Jim, I'd like you to tell us more about Benetech and how you actually reach beyond, obviously, that 5% to the majority of the population, please.
Sounds great. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I want to take you through a story that I think demonstrates what technology can do in terms of changing people's behavior, because actually that's at the heart of everything that we're talking about doing, is making people safer, making people less likely to commit abuses, giving people access to education, to employment, to healthier consumerism. All these different things involve behavior change, and that's what technology is actually quite good at. So my background is I'm a nerd. As they say, and in Silicon Valley, that's a badge of honor, not necessarily everywhere else. So when I was in university, like many nerds, I was learning how to make weapons because that's where the jobs were. And so we were learning how to make a smart bomb. And so the idea was you had a missile with a camera in the nose, and you would fire the missile, and it would recognize its target, and it would zoom in and would blow it up. Wow, cool technology. And I went back to my dorm room and I wondered, is there a more socially beneficial application of this technology? And so I was sitting there, I had to do a project, like, hey, instead of recognizing bridges and tanks, what if you could recognize letters and words and read to blind people? I thought, wow, cool idea. I went to my professor. He told me that the security agencies had already invented it and it only cost $2 million in installation. I went, not very practical. Long story short, I had the chance to start a Silicon Valley for-profit tech company that was going to make a machine that could read anything. So this is the idea of using machine intelligence. But to get the investors, we had to talk about how we were going to scan tax forms and insurance forms and contracts for lawyers. But a secret project on the side, we built a reading machine for the blind, from the same components that we had built a machine that would scan documents. And so we showed it off to our board of directors, all these venture capitalists who had each put $1 million or more into our company. And I was the VP of marketing, and we took the piece of paper and scanned it through, and it took a picture of the page. And then our secret technology was it recognized all the letters and words on that. And then a first-generation voice synthesizer read the words aloud. These are the times that try men's souls. But not quite that natural sounding. And so one of the investors said to me, wow, Jim, it worked. What's the market for reading machines to the blind? I said, I think it's about $1 million per year. Did not go over very well with our board of directors. They actually vetoed the project on the spot. They were really clear that they were about creating value. They invested money, they created jobs. But frankly, since our tech company was accidentally nonprofit, like many tech companies that intend to make a profit don't actually get there. They didn't want us working on the social good aspects of technology until we were highly profitable, and so they just vetoed the project. This is a microcosm of the problem of technology, is that in Silicon Valley, unless your market is hundreds of millions of dollars and growing like this, you can't get an investor interested. But the great thing about technology is once it's been created, the incremental cost to apply it to a social application is nearly nothing. So when I went back to my board of directors a year later and said, I want to start a charity, now we call it a social enterprise, on the side to make reading machines for the blind and not distract the management team from making all the money that we had promised to make them, they were pleased to give us essentially cost plus a couple percent, which meant an 80% discount off of these products. So then we started a social enterprise, and people were able to start scanning and reading books themselves. And this is kind of so before, blind people were read to, either by humans sitting next to them or by putting the books on tape. Now they have the power to scan any book that they want. So fast forward a whole bunch of years, and now we're thinking about, how do we move beyond people scanning one book at a time? When Harry Potter came out, 3,000 families spent 3 hours scanning the latest Harry Potter. And my son brought Napster home, and I thought, this is the coolest technology I'd ever seen. It's totally illegal, but very cool. Could we start Bookster for the blind? And so that's now our largest social enterprise. Though my lawyer talked me out of the name Bookster, I can't explain why he advised me that way. So we have Bookshare. It's the largest digital library for people with disabilities in the world. And we have about 500,000 users. We not only run the National Digital Library for Disabled Students in the United States, we also run the same thing in the UK in partnership with RNIB and Dyslexia Action. Run it in Canada, India, and we also have partnerships with the leading nonprofits in the vision field, such as Vision Australia and the Blind Foundation here in New Zealand. And so the idea is, instead of blind people reading to themselves, the Napster idea is that if one blind person or dyslexic person or a teacher or a parent has scanned the book, then everybody else would get access to it. And frankly, this is not a technology we've invented. It's what we call the ebook today, right? It's on your portable device. So we kind of run Amazon or Kindle for the blind and dyslexic. So 500,000 people, and now we have more than 500,000 different books. So that means that now the old state was blind people were read to, then they could scan themselves their own book. Now if anyone has scanned the book, everyone can benefit from that. And now we're working on the final phase of this technology, which is to put ourselves out of business as a social enterprise. And that's by convincing the publishing industry that they can make money by adding these features into mainstream books. And so now everyone will get the benefit of that. And so we started a certification process to certify that books were accessible to people with disabilities. And then we go to education authorities and say, gee, don't you want to buy a book that's accessible? And we'll actually have addressed this problem yourself. So that's one example of how we actually try to move this system ahead. And what I want to actually also touch on is the larger tech for good movement. People in Silicon Valley want to do good, and when their project or their idea is vetoed because of business limitations, they're very frustrated. And yet, there are so many different ways that we can apply technology to advance social objectives. You pick any field of social good, and I can probably, or someone on my team can probably come up with 3 or 4 different ways that we could do something amazing in terms of using software. Not because we're that smart, it's because we already have all these great for-profit examples of breakthrough technologies, whether it's using technology to make you more productive, using Google ad grants to help you find the people that you want to reach, having better data about behavior and what people are doing so that you can actually then throw all that data at a computer and say, warn me when someone's about to fall, or tell me that I should be working more about my workers' conditions. These tools are available, and I know a lot of people are kind of a little scared of the technology and software, and as someone who's been in Silicon Valley for over 30 years, computers are as dumb as bricks. Right? But they were very good at this algorithm thing. And if you can throw a whole bunch of data, whether it's about, getting to work on time, routing basically based on all the traffic, or whether it's analyzing domestic violence patterns or what people with disabilities really need to get access to education. The technology is there for us to take advantage of it. So I'm looking forward to more of your questions and answers and brainstorming with you about how the tools of Silicon Valley, which are so focused on the richest 5% of humanity, can actually be deployed on the margins to benefit the majority of humanity and accomplish the better, healthier, more environmentally sustainable world that we all are dreaming of. So looking forward to talking about that. There you go.
Thank you, Jim. What a great inspirational vision you have there. And I'm sure the audience will have quite a number of questions. I believe you all know how to put your questions forward. So if you could send some questions through, I believe they'll come through on the monitor here for us. But while I'm waiting for those, has anyone got a question from the floor? While we wait for the technology to catch up with the people. Oh, they're here. Okay, now, okay. So how might we ensure that technology doesn't only benefit those that can afford it, but everyone, that is, not further the inequality divide? Great question. Jim, do you want to take that one on?
I actually want to take the second one.
You want to take the second one? Okay.
Can I just go for that one, or does someone else? You want to go for the first one?
You do the second.
Okay. So Silicon Valley is making its money by selling you out, right? I mean, I think some people have heard that if you're not paying for the product, you are the product. Okay, and and this is actually a problem because, as you can imagine, Silicon Valley keeps changing what it's going to do with your data. You know, if you're a modern consumer, you are being analyzed for the purpose, of course, of making maximum money on advertising. It's very good at what its objective is, but it's not very good at what we want to do. So one of the things that, for example, we focus on is what if you're gathering human rights data, abuse data, right? So many of us who work in the social sector are working with vulnerable people and collecting data about what makes them vulnerable. So one of the first things we have to do is not sell their data and encrypt it, which means that it makes it harder for people to steal. So I think there is a need for a new wave of tech ventures who will have more respect for people's data. Now, you've heard about this. You talked about data. Who owns the data, right? And I think we have to move to a different kind of social bargain and make viable businesses where you're not the product.
Yep. So. Great. Thank you.
Add to something on that one.
Okay.
That's all right.
Yeah.
We've looked at this, I guess, for a long time because when we started collecting data, we were very big on the idea that it wasn't data that sort of people were giving without knowing. So they were actually opting in and saying, you bet I want you to use my data because I want you to use my data to change the world in ways that I care about. And I think that is quite different. I don't know if people read stuff around sort of where Google got a bit of crap recently where they were actually grabbing the credit card numbers on your sort of browsers and selling the credit card numbers back to the retail stores to know whether or not you've actually gone and bought stuff. And it's just like that sort of stuff to me is like going to ruin. You see what's gone with Uber around their CSR, it'll ruin those big guys. And I guess we want to be a platform where users actually do have control, total transparency around their data. Ethics is totally important.
I agree. Yep. Okay. Thank you. So Lucy and Matt, do you want to tackle the first question? Because I don't want to leave that one. It's a great one.
Yeah, I mean, our experience in this field has been, we were quite naive really about how technology was used within the health field, and then we got a bit of an eye-opener when we saw how it did work. So one of our partners had developed a technology bag that you swallow, and it takes a digital camera of your entire digestive tract and pings it into the hospital, so you don't have to have endoscopies anymore. And we spoke to him about how that was funded. And it turned out how it was funded was that there was a grant from the UK government, I think it was, that was given to the hospital to develop this technology, who then passed it on to a technology company who developed the technology and then owned the IP for that technology and sold it back to the NHS. So it was a double funded taxpayer, and it was at that point that we thought, well, we have to come in here and do something a bit different.
Yeah.
So I think technology has always been led by technologists. I don't believe it should be led by technologists. I think it should be led by us, and that we should tell technologists what to do. And at that point, the social business model comes in, and the value is retained within the social business. And that goes for when picking up on the data stream as well. Data streams for health and living should be owned by us. It shouldn't be owned by a corporate body. And then if it's a social business that owns that data, then you can sell it to a corporate body that matches your values. But part of the selling could be, if you're developing something, then part of that profit comes back to the people that can then reinforce and pay for more social purpose products. That's how I think it should be.
Yeah, good. Great idea. Okay, we've got a very specific one here. Love the Fit House, so that's great. How will it tackle social isolation issues?
So going back to the data again, one of the things that we were quite keen of was that as well as owning the data, the people in the houses who produce it should have value from it, so it should be reflected back to them. So part of what we're doing is working with the tenants in the house to see how they want that data reflected back to them, and also setting up a sort of gaming exercise with the data.
Yep.
So through the health service, we can pinpoint people who have similar diseases or who have had similar operations, so they can tie up with each other and see how they can, what paths they're both taking on recovery. So that the technology is about linking up people as well as improving services.
So it's creating a community, not just the individual housing. Yeah.
And if you like, if we're looking at sort of predictive analytics, if we're looking at early intervention, that intervention is as likely to be a social intervention as it is anything else. So it's identifying a change in behaviour, identifying somebody sort of regressing and not engaging. That the cure for that could be to prescribe more sort of social interaction, for example. So,
okay. Yeah. Good. So we've got Bitcoin. Did I see one on Bitcoin before?
Yeah,
It's disappeared. And blockchain. Did anyone want to tackle Bitcoin and blockchain? Jim.
So one of my board members is the head of the main open source blockchain project. And if you talk to anyone, blockchain will cure every ill, right? Whatever your problem is, you need a blockchain. And so one of the things that we've been diving into is how to actually use blockchain in socially beneficial ways. And blockchain it's just simply a public ledger that is in some ways more reliable than other public ledgers because a bunch of people sort of vouch for whatever the entry is. But that's all it is, right? It's nothing fancier than that. So like one idea is if your government wants to shut down all climate change information, why don't you put all of your climate change data on a blockchain, and that way the entire world will have that open voucher and it'll be impossible to suppress. So there's one example of how you might use the blockchain. And what if you're a conscious consumer? Maybe you want to take that part. No, you go.
We're definitely looking at blockchain and Bitcoin. I guess blockchain around sort of data of like consumer spending behavioral patterns and business behavior patterns, being able to go down supply lines and sort of verify certain things are going on down supply lines through blockchain. But then also, Bitcoin was up there. So in terms of the cryptocurrencies, like who knows, in 5 or 10 years, maybe there's the new currencies being created around conscious consumption, and sort of we want to be able to empower those consumers to not just have their spending known, but the values that sit behind any form of purchase.
Yeah.
We're also looking at blockchain from a health data perspective. So when you're passing data between the house and the National Health Service, it can be used as a verification system, so that you know the data has been passed and it hasn't been manipulated in the passing. So that's
It's
how
a
we're
great
looking
use
at
for it. Yes. Now, I saw a question on there before, Ben, specifically, it's gone again on conscious consumers, and it was about, does it extend to professional services?
Oh, I saw that one. I think we've done the second one. I was wondering if that can be...
They're rotating.
Yeah, they're just, it's okay.
That's okay.
Just, does
Somewhere
it
in there,
extend
yeah.
to professional services?
So yeah, we definitely don't currently do professional service, but the idea is, yeah, we'd like to create a platform where B2B happens as well. So businesses like our 400 or so stores can actually use professional services or any other supplier to provide them with information. But you'd have to make sure that those services are also audited and provide assurance around some of their corporate social responsibility.
Yep.
So yeah, it will be the case. We're launching into the UK, so into Europe, and we've got a great person to help run some of our sort of on-the-ground work as the CEO of PricewaterhouseCoopers. So it's a good example of a professional service that's actually starting to take on board some
Be
stuff.
involved.
Yeah.
That's great. Yeah, good. Now, there's a really big, wicked question up there from Ella. What technology holds the biggest potential to lift people out of poverty in New Zealand? That's a really wicked problem. That's something that I would probably tackle in a design thinking workshop if we were looking at that from an SAP perspective. Does anyone on the panel have any views on that? I mean, it's a pretty big, hairy problem, and I'm not sure there is a silver bullet.
No, I don't. So at Treasury, it was 2000, I'm trying to work out the years, but it was about 5 or 6 years ago. I led Treasury sort of input into the welfare reforms. It was actually not the worst thing in the world, but what actually the welfare reforms are trying to do was figure out what the best intervention, so using data to figure out what's the best way of intervening in a person's life based on predictions around their potential vulnerabilities. And so while it obviously gets bad press, it's called the impact or investment approach or social investment model. What it really is about saying, where are the risk things, where are the things that we can do, and what's the most effective way of actually providing a service to enable that person to be lifted. So I think the best technology to bring sort of people out of poverty is open source data on people's sort of personal patterns, behaviours, health stuff, and then let the government provide the most sort of effective solution for those people.
Yeah.
Excuse me, I know the answer.
Okay.
It's hearing aids. You give it to the politicians.
So yeah.
I think that's actually a really exciting thing. And the joke I tell in Silicon Valley is, I can whip out my phone and find Vietnamese sandwich shops open within 5 miles. But if I want to see anything about the social safety net, I can't find out where they are, where they're openings, is there a bed in that facility? We don't know those things. And so I think that we have a project called Open Referral. The idea is instead of everyone trying to build the one database to rule them all, that's a very sort of Lord of the Rings reference. But that actually isn't the way the business world has done it. You don't own the address of the barber shop, right? So how do you actually make the information about the social safety net a lot more visible, not only to people in the social sector, not only to social workers and the like, but to the consumers themselves? How could you put more power in the hands of people who are disadvantaged to actually come up with their own solutions? Because frankly, they often do that instead of or in spite of the social system.
So we come from a very rural area, and a lot of New Zealand is very rural as well.
Yeah.
The biggest difference to our area is having access to super fast broadband.
Yes.
I think that fundamentally changes and creates employment in areas, just having that. So it might not be as technical as you think, it might just be about access.
About access to the infrastructure. Yeah.
And putting my carbon dynamic hat on for a minute, I definitely have to sort of mention fuel poverty, which is such a key issue. And I think the insulation levels that are deployed within houses generally in New Zealand are certainly a lot lower than we have in the UK. And as carbon dynamic, we try and exceed those levels by some way. I think if technology can start to give us better sort of information on that as a value proposition, the investment of more in the fabric of a building up front, what can that deliver further down the line, and actually capturing and being able to interrogate that data and make a sort of compelling proposition for that would be really key, because it would be great to see a more fabric first approach adopted.
Yep, absolutely.
Can I get the next one?
The app solution. Yeah, I actually wanted to tackle that one too, but you go ahead. No,
okay.
go.
Yeah, this is the most fun part, right? You guys have some great questions. Yes, apps are totally overrated, and I've developed a lot of apps. And I think part of this is that we keep forgetting about the human beings in this equation. Is people actually don't use apps. Other than Facebook and messaging, and and your web browser, that may be like the thing that most people use. And so we just have this vision that apps are going to magically solve all this problem. And I just come back and say, imagine the behavior change that will be involved in someone starting to use an app on a regular basis. It just doesn't happen. So when apps are actually good is when someone is going to be doing something frequently and it's going to deliver a tremendous amount of value. So we have a reading app for dyslexic people that features karaoke-style reading. Follow the bouncing ball. It's the killer app for dyslexic kids. That's an app that actually gets used on a daily basis. But someone asked us in the last election cycle, please build an election protection app. Basically, help minority populations who are being told that they shouldn't vote. And I said, great, I'm an African-American grandmother in the Mississippi Delta, and I've just been turned away from voting. So I whip out my phone, go to the Play Store, download the app, the protection, and I enter in a single case. I was denied the right to vote. It says, it will never, ever happen. So anyway, I could...
Yep.
Apps.
Yep. Yes. I think we're all with Jim on that one.
Yeah.
Yep. Great. The next one, great case studies on tech, social enterprises delivering tech-based solutions, but how do non-tech use tech better? And I think, Lucy, you're probably a really good example of that because you're actually not a tech organisation. You've partnered and collaborated with Matt to be able to make your vision happen. So that's very much a collaborative framework there. So maybe we could kick off there with you responding to that.
So I'll tell you the paths that we started going down and then had to reverse and come back from. So we knew what we wanted to deliver after speaking to our tenants. And we were going to go down the traditional route of putting out a tender and looking for a technology company who would build what we wanted, and we got the money for it. We had all the funding there for it. It was significant funding. And then we stopped because we realised that if we went forward with this, we would have a piece of technology developed that would probably be out of date within a week. And we had no way of changing it. We would have it, but we can't do technology ourselves. So how do we do this? One great tip I would have for you is that there are some seriously good technology people working in very large corporate firms who love what we are doing and go overboard to help. It's just a case of finding them. And I think one thing that we should do in the future, and we might do it, is we can't advertise who we've got working with us at the moment, but we hope to get to a place where we can do that. But suffice to say, we've got people in global arms companies who are helping us develop our technology and are not front-facing at the moment, but probably will be. So I think it's about taking the technology in-house. I think that as we're going forward, technology guys used to be kind of the exception, and now with young people coming through, more and more people can develop technology. So I think it's about getting technology in-house. Everybody's a tech company. Everybody's using tech, and it's getting the front face has to be the customer face, and the technology comes behind it. So that's how you do it. You get tech in-house and not go out to the market for it.
Yeah. Okay. Good. I think from my own experience with SAP too, we work with a lot of social enterprise organisations as well, and that issue of scalability is definitely one that they often come to us with. So I've got a really good idea, but how do we actually scale this and make this work beyond a few thousand, so we can hit the majority, the 95% that are left. So definitely having it in-house, but I think there is an argument as well for looking at scalability to see if you can tap in and collaborate.
So we've been here 4 days, and we have spoken to 16 organisations from the top to the bottom of New Zealand, and we are looking at partnering, as I had said before, about social business model, and we have various social businesses and non-profits in New Zealand who are very happy to work with us in taking that forward. So if you have a social business, I think it might be easier to find partners to do it, and it's just accessing through this kind of event other people with a social mind.
Yeah. So it sounds like a lot of conversations for the person that asked that question there need to be had as well, just going out and talking to as many people as you can and finding out who you can collaborate with and how you can actually upskill your people in-house as well.
I'll add just a tiny bit to that, I mean, there's a lot of free technologies out there as well. Like, you know, we use mostly free technologies to do lots of the sort of general business operations. So, you know, Google, the whole suite of Google, everything we've got, all of our documents are online. It's a free service. Every document shared with everyone in the organization, so it's a very open sort of document sort of management system, but it works really well. Slack is another great, easy, free tool to use. There's a lot of, so the running of the business can be done with technology that's free. So it's, you know, accessible to any business. So I'm happy to talk to people about those free things that we use.
Okay, we've got one here. What do you think will be the impact of advancing battery technology, which is obviously something that's really out there in the news a lot at the moment? I know in Australia, in particular with Elon Musk and looking at South Australian power networks and how they could actually run the utilities and things off battery services. But pretty interesting question. Anyone here had experiences with battery technology and how that could be utilised? Matt, you're probably the most likely.
Yeah, no, sure. I mean, so our focus when designing and manufacturing the homes is that fabric first approach. You're trying to reduce the amount of energy that's needed within the home, sort of first, you know, as the first priority. But then when we're deciding what forms of heating and things to go in the homes, we're concentrating on electricity, even though at the moment it's maybe not seen as the greenest when assessed within the UK, but mindful that is absolutely the direction of travel. You know, the most sustainable options for energy will be electric. So if we're putting that technology in now, then we're hopefully future-proofing for shortly down the line. Now, if we can have, obviously, you know, very efficient batteries that enable us to regulate the electricity consumption and use and create more of a sort of microgrid type of format for things, then it enables, you're reducing transmission losses, you're increasing the redundancy within the system, and hopefully sort of empowering and enabling people to sort of be more in control of their own energy. So, and I would imagine by default more conscious of their own energy use as well. Somehow that would create a form of engagement that makes you more in tune with what energy you're using, hopefully.
Yeah.
And we did look into Bill Gates has got another model coming. He's developing in MIT, so there's quite a few guys doing it. I mean, Elon Musk's famous
it's
for
not
the
quite
car.
at that maturity level yet, is it?
But it absolutely is a game changer. When they make it work as effectively as it should work.
So it's the scalability there again.
It is, and I suspect that there are large multinationals that don't want it to work. However, I'm quite sure that we will get there with it.
Yeah, and I think it's worth noting that a few years ago it'd be a very different sort of view on that as an industry and as a technology. You know, look how fast it's moving. Look how fast all of the technology is moving. You know, it's moving at a pace where we can make decisions based on what we would anticipate the technology looking like during the duration of time that we'll be developing something. So we could look 18 months ahead. You know, the stuff that we're doing with virtual and augmented reality, it's crazy what you can anticipate coming on stream by the time we've, you know, so you can be anticipating that rapid progression with the technology. You know, so I think Elon Musk has been a great catalyst for that, you know, in the marketplace, and that stimulates the rest of the market to really move much faster than it already would have done. So
yeah, you need those thought leaders out there, don't you? Really pushing the barrow and saying, you know, this is a great thing, we need to be following it through.
It would be great if we refresh some of the questions, because I
Yeah,
saw ones
'cause there's
going
lots
by.
of repeat questions there.
And we've already answered some of these.
Top three can be taken off.
I think, will social enterprise become more or less relevant in the era of automation? I know that I'm asked again and again from my perspective in working on the human-centric side of things that, you know, if everything's automated, then there's a point where are people going to lose their jobs? And, you know, there's that fear factor out there. And I constantly have to reassure people that actually no know humans have an amazing capacity to adapt and to change. We've been doing it for a long, long time. So we're able to do it again. And the types of jobs of the future will be more people-centric. I had a conversation with some engineers recently who are a bit concerned about that. And I was saying to them, well, instead of sitting there and focusing on your CAD drawings and things, you'll be able to be out there knocking on doors, talking to people about the impacts in the community of putting the road here as opposed to putting the road there. And then you'll have all that data and predictive analytics to be able to say, which is a good idea, one over the other, instead of having to have a million meetings and talk fests about it. So you can become very directed in what you do, but you can also use that time that you've got then to actually go out and talk to people. I do have to say that one of them said, but I didn't get into engineering to talk to people. So my argument sort of fell down the tube then. But yes, does anyone else want to answer that question as well?
Well, I mean, certainly there was a question there about essentially the jobless recovery, and which you've just touched on, and it's a huge worry, right? I mean, we're simultaneously excited about the fact that autonomous vehicles are going to be a huge boon to blind people and to seniors who want to stay independent longer because they don't have to worry about driving, but we'll also lose millions of jobs of people who drive. Yes. And so it's kind of a challenge is that, many social entrepreneurs are trying to reform a social sector that was created, say, post-World War II, when we had industrial economies, and are trying to bring those sectors into sort of the modern era, just as we may find ourselves having a new set of problems around fewer jobs available to unskilled workers, right? Which has already been a trend that's been going on. So I think social enterprises are going to become more and more relevant, and I like to think that we're going to influence the mainstream businesses of this world to realize that racing to the bottom, least common denominator, squeezing every ounce out for the shareholder, actually doesn't net benefit our society, and we're going to have to work on both changing corporate behavior as well as influencing governments, which is a challenge when the governments are in the pocket of the big corporates. No, I didn't say that, did I?
There's a question here that's leapt to me, which was with the ex-Google Anthony Lewandowski creating an AI deity for the betterment of society. Thoughts on robots, the betterment of society and social enterprise? So I was having a conversation with Lucy and Matt again before the session about La Trobe University, which is based in Melbourne in Australia, and I do a lot of work with them. And they've come up with what they call a socially assistive robot. And she goes into nursing homes, and the idea of her is that she can have facial recognition, she can be able to, if she's placed into a home with someone, be able to monitor, similar in a way, but I think Matt's technology is the next level, but this is, she can see whether they've been eating or drinking and what the movements are and whether they've been still for a while. So she was initially sort of as more of a companion, like a pet. You have a pet robot, you have a pet companion pet dog. And what's been really interesting was that, putting her in the nursing homes was people were very unsure about her. This is a robot, and this is people often, over their 70s, and they're just not comfortable with that. So we got her to start reading bingo. Right? And she became their best friend. So putting her at the front of the table and reading out the bingo numbers, after a while they started to trust her. So it's been really interesting to see that, you just put a robot in, and you expect it to do good things from a socially assistive perspective, but what you actually have to do is look at that user-centric perspective, look at how, that person is fearful of this particular stereotype almost of a robot, and how you can get around that. So what you do is, like we did, you find a way to do that, which was through bingo. So obviously robots can be used in a number of other social enterprises. So anyone here had experience with artificial intelligence and robots?
Well, the joke is when it starts working, it stops being called artificial intelligence. So many of the things that we thought were artificial intelligence 10, 20, 30 years ago are no longer, a computer playing chess used to be supposed to be amazing, but that's yes. 20th century. Yes. So I think the idea of machines learning from data is the technology trend of the current times. I was speaking to a Google senior VP last month, and he just explained how they had trained 15,000 software developers when not to write software, right? Rather than you trying to figure out how this works, just throw a whole bunch of labeled data at a giant machine and it will spit out the pattern. And of course, Google's doing that to predict, which ad you'll click on and make the most money. But imagine, the pattern that Lucy was talking about, where it picks up that you're actually on the floor and that you've stayed on the floor, so therefore someone should come and check in on you, or that your gait is starting to become irregular, and that's a precursor of either Parkinson's or something. I mean, as we become fully instrumented, we'll have a lot of opportunities to do these things that are very, very basic in terms of analysis. So if you think about the Sustainable Development Goals, how are we going to make 1 billion people who will never see a doctor healthy? Well, what if the cell phone and a nurse with 6 months of training can administer just about any medical procedure, short of surgery, but in terms of diagnosis, prescripting medicines? I mean, these are ways that we could actually imagine these things going. Now, I think we're a long way away from an AI deity because I see how flawed computers are and how, just because they spit out the answer doesn't mean that that's actually the answer. But it is an area that's going to be just transformational, and we should be taking advantage of it.
You want to talk about your AI?
No, I mean, I think I was just going to say I think it's really important that we consider, and it's the way we look at it, that the tech that we're going to deploy gives us the ability to enhance the face-to-face interactions, not to substitute for it. It gives us the opportunity. There's a finite amount of face-to-face available, or the sort of care resource available. It's always that problem's not going to go away. But if we can use the technology and the artificial intelligence to actually be very much more targeted about that, then we can improve those interactions and add value rather than reduce that. So.
Yeah, I mean, we're following AI very closely. We're creating lots of good data, and what we see, I guess, in the next few years is sort of the scaling up of avatar, or people, and so that you actually have a relationship. You don't have to in terms of accessibility. It's not about having to buy phones and be on technology. It's actually about normal communication. So you'd ask, wake up, who's seen the movie Her? Yeah. So give it a few years, and there'll be avatars that are in these sorts of homes that actually you have a conversation with, and they ask you how you're feeling, and they are empathetic to your values. They can help you connect with local businesses or providers. So I just think, don't that sort of robot concept is, I don't know, they'll be there. They're coming, definitely, the avatars.
Yeah. And can be used for good.
For good, yeah.
Yeah. Now, there's been a few questions up there about data privacy issues. So I think we could probably address all of those in one, just in general. I'm not sure if there's one up there, but is anyone here like to address, data privacy and the concerns there? I mean, data can be used for so much potential. There's so many good causes, in ways that we could use it. But of course, the privacy is, a strong concern, and we do have to make sure that people are protected. So maybe have you got examples of how you protect the data in people's homes?
Yeah, I mean, there's the whole question about should government get involved in managing data security, and we've had that quite a bit dealing with health records. So we started off talking about technology when we were doing the Fit House. We now don't talk about technology so much. We talk about health and care and housing that's delivered by technology. So then the question is, should you have government getting involved in care and health and housing? And the answer is obviously yes. That it's getting away that the government works with you rather than becomes a stopper. So one of the things when we started off with this was that how could we take forward the technology in the homes and link it up with the NHS quicker than has already been going on. So the NHS are quite open about them being able to move forward more in 1 year than they have in the last 10 by taking it from a social purpose housing side and a wellness perspective rather than a health perspective.
Yeah.
Now, actually, the security that we're putting around the data in the houses is actually higher than is in the NHS, but I think it has to have that integrity within that sphere if you're going forward.
Yeah.
So, and what we have is actually the Scottish Government working with us to tie up that security behind us as we go along and set procedures and principles around what we're doing.
I think it very much has to be that opt-in as well, because there's too many concerns about being a natural default that people can access your data. You really do have to be able to opt into that and to sign up to that and to know fully what the data is and how it will be used. So that's really important. I think that's what scares most people, especially when they look at the retail apps that are around at the moment. You're on Facebook or something and it pops up, because retail are very good at it, saying, "Oh, you've just looked at these shoes. You might like to look at these ones too." And you think, "Whoa, hang on." So it's very different when we're looking at social enterprises and looking at improving societal outcomes.
And I just want to answer George's question, which is now gone, but the tech is retrofittable, so it doesn't sit within the fit house. It can go into any house.
Okay, good. So I think we might wrap up there. We've still got a few minutes before lunch, but I'd really like to thank the panel. We've had great insights into a range of different technologies. I did mention, just lastly though, Jim, that I was particularly interested, and I think a question came up before, which has gone now to, about your software in terms of dealing with information from people. Yes, yeah.
So we went to the human rights movement about 15 years ago thinking that we were going to bring them drones and satellite images, and they came back and said, we actually need to protect the stories. And when you actually think about it as a human rights activist, the only asset other than the activist community itself that the human rights movement has is stories of people suffering. That's how they make change, whether you're Amnesty talking about a single thing or you're Human Rights Watch talking about patterns. So our goal was to equip the human rights movement with the tools that they wanted. One, so they didn't lose the stories.
Yes.
Two, that the bad guys didn't get their hands on the story, because often it was, a woman testifying against a police sergeant who shot her husband, who was a labor organizer, or something like that. And so the idea is, how can you use the information as a tool for social change? And it really was a test for us, because, of course, as nerds, we had all these great ideas for tech, and it came out to this very fundamental, which is the single story or 5,000 or 100,000 stories. And someone said, what's an example of a non-technical social enterprise benefiting from this? And I think a great example is, we worked with the LGBT movement in Africa and Uganda and other countries. And just one example is Malawi had never had any national reports on abuses against the gay community. And we equipped a whole variety of different grassroots groups to collect stories about police abuse against LGBT people. They published the first national report. Often nothing happens. In this case, the Inspector General of the Malawi Police said, gay people are Malawians, they have constitutional protections. Police should not be arresting the victim of gay violence, basically people beating up gay people. They should arrest the perpetrators. And they changed that policy and started actually arresting people who beat up gay people. So that is the human rights movement is about the least technological movement you can imagine.
Yep.
And often they see technology as a source of the evil that is infiltrating their community. So anything we can do to help tip the balance back in their favor and change policy and have a more just society is something that's worth doing.
It's amazing, gives you goosebumps.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's a lot of people in the room here, I think, who are probably thinking, how can I harness technology for my own organisation? How do I actually get in there and use it to help improve the outcomes that I'm looking for? So our panel members, I believe, will be around at lunchtime. So we'll pop out in a few minutes, and I really encourage you to talk to them. Also talk to anyone that you see from SAP around the conference as well, and anyone else that you know that's here that, if they say they're in technology, jump on them. Because I think one of the key things we've learnt here very much is about that collaboration as well, and just how important that is, and particularly when you're right at the start and you really don't know what to do or how to leverage technology. I think you really need to just go and, find someone who does know what they're doing and pick their brains. So I encourage you to do that. So thank you very much. Thank you, Matt, Lucy, Ben and Jim very much for today's session, and I'm sure we all got a lot out of it. Thank you.